I put down my fork and looked at my watch. It was 7:30 in the evening. Exactly 5 years ago, almost to the minute, I stepped into this house with 2 suitcases and the hope of a happy old age surrounded by loved ones. It's funny how accurately memory marks life's turning points. Grandma, you're looking at that old clock again, remarked Garth, my 13-year-old grandson, the only one in the family who sometimes noticed my gestures and habits. They tell the right time, honey, I replied, unlike your electronic gizmos. Lydia, my only daughter, rolled her eyes, a gesture that in recent years had become her signature response to anything I said. At 42, she looked remarkably like her high school version, the same impatience with other people's opinions, the same sense of superiority, only now seasoned with wrinkles of irritation near her eyes. Fergus, her husband, nonchalantly continued to cut the roast beef, pretending to be completely absorbed in the process. Tall, with early gray hair and the manners of a man accustomed to being listened to without interruption, he had been the chief physician at Owasso's private clinic for 16 years. In the city, he was respected. At home, they feared his silence more than his shouting. "Mom, would you mind not starting?" Lydia said with that special tone that comes from people talking to very young children or very old people. "It's been a hard day today." "I didn't start," I objected softly, putting some salad on. I was just answering Garth. Cassandra, my 16-year-old granddaughter, didn't take her eyes off the phone under the table. Her thin fingers with black painted fingernails glided across the screen with astonishing speed. She was going through a difficult age when family dinners seemed like a pointless waste of time that could be spent socializing with friends. "Cassie," I said, "why don't you put the phone away for dinner?" That simple phrase, which I'd said probably hundreds of times over the years, was the trigger for some reason today. "Oh my God, Mom!" Lydia exploded, dropping her fork with a clatter. "Can you for once not tell us how to raise our children? If Cassie wants to sit on the phone, that's our business." I froze, feeling the awkwardness spill across the room like spilled wine. Garth stared at his plate. Cassie finally looked up from the phone, her eyes widening in surprise. "I was just suggesting," I began, but Lydia interrupted. "You're always just suggesting. Every dinner, every conversation. You can't help but interfere. Why can't you just sit back and be grateful that we're sheltering you?" Fergus finally looked up from his plate. His face showed irritation, but not surprise. He'd been waiting for this moment, I realized. Maybe he'd been preparing the ground. "Lydia," he said in that doctor's tone of voice he used to give patients unpleasant diagnoses, "I don't think your mother fully realizes the burden she's placed on our family." "Burden?" I repeated, feeling my hands shaking. "I sold my house to be closer to you. I help with the kids, with the cooking, with the cleaning, which we're redoing anyway," Lydia put in. "You can't even vacuum." I felt the color flood my cheeks. The situation was absurd. A 72-year-old woman being told off for not using the vacuum cleaner properly, as if she were a negligent housekeeper. "And your endless stories about the past," Lydia continued, as if a dam had burst. "No one cares what the price of bread was in the 70s or how you met your father. No one." "Children often ask," I said quietly, looking at my grandchildren. Garth nodded briefly, but immediately looked away, meeting their father's eyes. "They're just being polite," Fergus said. Unlike his grandmother, who doesn't understand boundaries. I felt something clench inside. 5 years of accumulated resentments, of misunderstandings, of petty humiliations suddenly crystallized into this moment of clarity. They didn't want me here. Maybe they never did. "I moved here at your request," I reminded myself, trying to speak calmly. "When you said the kids needed a grandmother around." "That was before you turned into a grouchy old woman who criticizes everything," Lydia shouted. "Before you started spying on us and sticking your nose in our business." I froze. So they suspected. Knew I'd seen something, noticed something. The secret I'd kept for the past 3 years was suddenly tangible, like another person at the table. "I'm not spying," I said, my mouth drying. "I just live here." "And that's exactly the problem." Lydia jumped up, her face contorted with rage. "You live here. You're always here. You're always watching, judging, interfering. You're a burden to our family. Go away." The silence that followed that scream was deafening. Cassandra dropped the phone, which fell to the parquet with a clatter. Garth seemed to stop breathing. Fergus slowly wiped his mouth with a napkin, as if he were attending a business dinner rather than a family scandal. Lydia, he finally said quietly, I don't think this is the most constructive approach. For a moment, I thought he was going to stand up for me, but the next sentence shattered that illusion. Beryl deserves a chance to correct her behavior. We can discuss the house rules. I looked at my daughter, expecting some sign of regret. But Lydia crossed her arms across her chest, her eyes burning with determination. No, Fergus. I can't take it anymore. Either she leaves or I take the children and go to my sister's. It's your choice. I rose slowly from the table. My legs felt like cotton, but my back remained straight, a habit developed from decades of teaching elementary school. Standing up straight, even when you want to cringe. That won't be necessary, I said, surprised at the calmness in my voice. I'll leave. Grandma, no! Garth exclaimed, raising his voice for the first time all night. That's not what Mom meant. That's exactly what I meant. Lydia cut him off. And don't try to manipulate the children, Mom. It's beneath even you. I looked at my grandchildren, a frightened Garth and a confused Cassandra. In 5 years, I'd seen them grow up day by day, taking them to school, helping them with homework, healing their broken knees and broken hearts. I loved them more than I could ever put into words. I looked around at everyone at the table. The flushed, angry Lydia, the unfazed Fergus, the confused children. The family dinner had become a scene of my public humiliation. But in that moment, standing at the table, I suddenly felt an extraordinary clarity. It was as if a veil had fallen from my eyes, and for the first time in years, I saw the situation for what it was, without self-deception, without excuses. I walked up the stairs, feeling the pain in my knees with each step. Maybe it wasn't the arthritis, but the weight of the moment. The decision I'd made at dinner was weighing on my shoulders more heavily than any physical weight. Behind me were the shocked faces of my grandchildren, the cold stare of Fergus, and the angry eyes of Lydia, my only daughter, who had just kicked me out of the house. The small room that had served as my bedroom for the past 5 years was met with the usual asceticism. A narrow bed, an old dresser, a desk I'd brought from my home, the only thing I'd insisted on when I moved in. It was the desk where I used to check my notebooks when I was still teaching elementary school, where I used to write letters to my husband when he was away on business trips. Now it was just a picture of Garth and Cassandra, taken 3 years ago at Christmas, before adolescents had made their smiles rare. I pulled a suitcase out from under the bed, the same one I'd come here with 5 years ago. I remember Lydia calling me after my father died, telling me the kids needed a grandmother nearby, that the big house was too empty for me alone, that Owasso had the best schools for Garth and Cassandra. I sold the house I'd lived in for 40 years, left friends, a familiar life, all to be near the only family I had left. The first year was almost idyllic. I helped with the kids, cooked on weekends, told stories about what Lydia was like as a child. Fergus was polite, if not cordial. The children, not yet shackled by adolescent alienation, genuinely enjoyed my presence. We often played board games. I helped them with their homework, read books before bed. And then something changed. Unnoticeable at first, little remarks from Lydia about how I folded towels or chopped vegetables. Barely noticeable grimaces from Fergus when I told stories from the past. Gradually, the criticism became more and more overt. My space in the house was shrinking, physically and emotionally. I began to methodically put my clothes into my suitcase, trying to choose the essentials. A light knock on the door interrupted my musings. Garth stood on the doorstep, his usually cheerful face contorted with worry. "Grandma," he said quietly, as if he was afraid his parents would hear him. "Are you really leaving?" "I am, dear," I replied, continuing to put things away. "Sometimes adults need space from each other." "But where are you going to go? It's almost 9 o'clock at night." I smiled, trying not to make the smile look strained. "I'm going to call Winifred. Remember we went to her house for tea last fall? She has a big house on Maple Street." "That old lady with the cats?" Garth wrinkled his nose but corrected himself. "You mean your friend who gave us raisin cookies?" "That's right," I nodded, pulling a photo album from the shelf. "Winifred is my oldest friend. We went to college together. Mom said you could come back if you started." He hesitated, searching for words. Respect their boundaries. I suppressed a sigh. Typical Lydia, using a child as a go-between, putting her own terms in his mouth. Honey. I walked over to my grandson and put my hands on his shoulders. Some things are more complicated than they seem. Sometimes people need to break up to find their way back to each other. And sometimes breaking up is just the end of the story. I didn't bother telling him that I wasn't going back, that his mother had crossed a line that couldn't be undone by apologies, that his father was involved in things a 13-year-old boy shouldn't know about. Will you leave your number? He asked, and there was such genuine concern in his voice that my heart squeezed. Sure. I wrote the number on a piece of paper and handed it to him. Call me anytime, and give the same to Cassandra. At that moment, Lydia appeared in the doorway. Her face was tense, her eyes reddened, as if she'd been crying. But I knew my daughter. It was tears of rage, not remorse. Garth, she said with pressure, it's time for you to do your homework. But Mom, right now, she said in a tone that brooked no objection. Garth gave me one last look, helpless, guilty, and left the room. Lydia gave me a cold stare. I hope you're not filling his head with stories about what a terrible mother I am. I would never do that, I replied calmly. Unlike you, I don't use children in my games. Her face contorted. You never understood me, she exhaled. Always thinking you knew better, always looked down on me. I shook my head, closing my suitcase. No, Lydia. I've always looked at you with love, with concern, sometimes with bewilderment, but always with love. If you loved me, her voice trembled, you would respect my decisions, my family, my marriage. I looked at her clenched fists, at her knuckles white with tension. My little girl who once brought me dandelions picked in the park had turned into a woman kicking her mother out of the house. Love doesn't mean blindness, I said quietly. I see what's going on in this house. I see what you and Fergus are doing. Her eyes widened, a flicker of fear in them for a moment, but she pulled herself together quickly. I don't know what you mean, she said. If you're referring to the way we raise our children— You know exactly what I mean, I interrupted, raising my voice for the first time in a long time. The fake reports, the hidden side effects, about you and Fergus putting people in danger for money and reputation. Lydia went pale. Her hand instinctively went to her throat, a gesture she'd done since childhood when she was afraid or nervous. You're delusional, she said, but her voice sounded uncertain. Old age fantasies. Then why are you so desperate for me to leave? I asked, picking up my suitcase. Why now when the clinical trials are almost complete? She took a step back as if I were contagious. Get out, she whispered. Just get out of my house. I walked past her, feeling strangely calm. 5 years I'd lived in fear of losing the last link to my family. 5 years I'd kept quiet about what I knew. Now that the choice had been made for me, I felt not grief, but relief. Fergus was waiting for me on the stairs, tall, trim, with a perfectly ironed shirt, an impeccable posture, a model head of household, and a respected doctor. No one would have guessed that this man methodically falsifies the results of drug trials, which could cost the lives of dozens, if not hundreds of patients. Let me help you with your suitcase, he said with fake politeness, extending his hand. I handed him the suitcase and started down the stairs, holding on to the railing. My knees reminded me of themselves again, but I didn't let myself show weakness. Downstairs in the hallway, Cassandra was standing there. Her eyes were red. She had actually been crying, unlike her mother. Her cell phone, usually out of her hands, lay forgotten on the console by the entrance. Grandma, she said softly, I'm going to miss you. I hugged her, breathing in the smell of the apple-scented shampoo she'd used since she was a little girl. I will too, sweetheart, but we'll see each other, I promise. Cassandra. Lydia's voice came from upstairs. Go to your room? But Mom! Now! Cassandra flinched, gave me one last glance, and slowly made her way up the stairs. I heard the door of her room slam upstairs. Fergus opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. I followed him, looking back at the house I'd called my own for 5 years. The framed pictures on the walls, the vase of artificial flowers I'd bought last spring, the hook for my coat in the hallway, the small traces of my presence that would soon fade away as if I'd never been here. The evening air was cool, almost chilly. The beginning of October in Owasso was always unpredictable. It could be warm, almost summer-like during the day, and in the evening the temperature would drop, reminding me that winter was coming. I wished I'd brought my coat. It was left hanging in the hallway, and it seemed humiliating to go back for it. Fergus didn't stop on the porch. He walked down the path to the gate, opened it, and stepped out onto the sidewalk. Then with a sudden movement, he dropped my suitcase to the ground. Not threw it, but he didn't set it down neatly either. He was just getting rid of a burden he'd had enough of. "I called a cab," he said, looking over my head. "It'll be here in 10 minutes. "Thank you," I said, surprised at my own calm. "That's very thoughtful of you." He grimaced at the sarcasm, but didn't say anything. We stood across from each other, an old woman and a man in the prime of life, mother-in-law and son-in-law, two people who had never really understood each other. "You know, Fergus," I said at last, "when Lydia brought you to meet me, I thought she'd made a good choice. Successful, educated, from a good family. You seem so grounded, so reliable." He tensed as if expecting a blow. "The years have shown that first impressions are deceptive," I continued. "Beneath the mask of respectability lies a man willing to risk his patients' lives for profit." "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but there was a twinkle of concern in his eyes. "I'm talking about the ART 43 clinical trials," I said calmly. "The falsified reports where you and Lydia forgot to mention the serious side effects in 20% of the patients." Fergus turned pale. His face looked like a wax mask in the streetlight. "These are absurd accusations," he said, lowering his voice and glancing around at the neighboring houses. "You have no proof." "Do I?" I raised an eyebrow. "What about copies of the original reports I made 3 years ago? Or the recording of your conversation with the pharmaceutical company rep where you explicitly talk about withholding data?" It was a bluff. I didn't have a recording, although I did hear that conversation while standing outside the half-open office door. But Fergus couldn't know for sure. His face contorted with a mixture of fear and rage. "You've been spying on me? In my own house?" "I accidentally witnessed it," I corrected. "And then I started paying attention. It's hard not to when something's wrong." Fergus took a step forward, his fists clenched. For a moment I was afraid he was going to hit me, but he stopped, pulling himself together with a visible effort. "What do you want?" He gritted his teeth. "Money!" I laughed bitterly. "You still don't get it, Fergus. I'm not a blackmailer. I'm a mother who worries about her daughter and a grandmother who doesn't want her grandchildren to grow up in a family of criminals." "Then why didn't you say anything for 3 years?" He narrowed his eyes. "If you're so principled—" I looked away. It was a question I'd asked myself countless times. "Because I was afraid of losing my family," I answered honestly. "Because I hoped you'd come to your senses. Because I'd convinced myself that the side effects weren't serious enough to risk Lydia and the children's well-being." I looked him straight in the eye. "But today, you and Lydia made a decision for me. Kicked me out of the family I was so afraid of losing. And now I have nothing to lose, Fergus. No more secrets, no more silence." At that moment, a cab pulled up to the sidewalk. The driver, a young man with a tired face, rolled down his window. "Mrs. Sangwain?" he asked. "A ride to the Riverview Hotel?" "Yes," I answered, not taking my eyes off Fergus. "That's me." The driver got out to help with the suitcase. Fergus stood still, his face a mask of shock and rage. "You wouldn't dare," he whispered. "Think of Lydia, of the children." "They're all I think about," I replied, opening the cab door. For 5 years I'd kept quiet for their sake, but sometimes silence hurts more than the truth. I got into the car and closed the door. Through the glass I saw Fergus standing on the sidewalk, his tall figure tense, his fists clenched. Our gazes met for a moment, and I saw something in his eyes that I'd never noticed before: fear. Not for me, not for the patients who might suffer from his machinations, but for himself. The cab pulled away, taking me away from the house I'd lived in for 5 years, from the daughter who'd rejected me, from the grandchildren I loved more than life. But in that moment, I didn't feel exiled. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from fear, from silent complicity, from compromising my conscience. The phone rang in my purse. Lydia's number. I didn't answer it. Whatever she wanted to say, it was too late. I'd made it clear to Fergus that I wasn't going to keep their secrets anymore, and I wasn't about to back down. The Riverview Hotel greeted me with dim chandeliers and quiet music in the lobby. The few guests, mostly business travelers, had already gone to their rooms, and only a young receptionist with neatly styled hair and a fake smile that became a little more genuine when he saw a potential client was bored at the front desk. "Good evening," he said in a practiced, cheerful tone. "What can I do for you?" "I need a room," I replied, pulling out my credit card. One night, he quickly completed the paperwork without asking too many questions about an elderly woman checking into a hotel late at night with only one suitcase. In a small town like Owasso, curiosity usually takes precedence over professionalism, but today I lucked out with indifference. The room was standard: featureless beige furnishings, a bed draped in starched linens, and a window overlooking the parking lot. I put my suitcase down, sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time that long evening, I let myself realize what had happened. I'd been kicked out of my house. My own daughter had yelled that I was a burden. My son-in-law threateningly implied that I should keep quiet about his machinations. My grandchildren looked at me with frightened eyes, unable to understand how a familiar family dinner had turned into a scene of banishment. I didn't cry. Tears seemed misplaced, not sadness, but anger and bitter disappointment overwhelmed me. 5 years I had lived in their house. 5 years I had endured petty humiliations. 5 years I had kept silent about the things that would ruin their lives. And still I found myself thrown out on the street like an unwanted thing. The phone in my bag vibrated the third time in the last hour. I pulled it out and saw a message from Lydia. "I hope you realize what you've done. It's too late to apologize now." I grinned bitterly. Typical Lydia. Even now she was shifting the blame onto me. Even now, when she'd literally kicked me out the door, I was supposed to feel guilty. Next came a text from Garth. "Grandma, are you okay? Mom said you said something stupid." My heart clenched. Poor boy, caught up in adult drama. I quickly replied, "I'm fine, honey. Don't worry about me. Focus on your studies and be a good brother to Cassandra." A minute later, the phone vibrated again. "When are you coming back?" I stared at those 3 words, not knowing what to answer. The truth, never, seemed too cruel for a 13-year-old. The lie, soon, would be dishonest. Finally, I wrote, "Let's talk about this later. Right now, you'd better not text me until your parents calm down." After a short okay, the texting stopped. I put my phone down and rubbed my temples. The headache that had started at dinner was getting worse. I had to decide what to do next. The clock read almost 11 p.m., too late to call Winifred. But I knew my old friend wouldn't take offense to a call at midnight, given the circumstances. I dialed her number, and she answered after the second beep, as if she'd been sitting by the phone waiting for a call. "Beryl?" Her voice, hoarse from age and decades of smoking, a habit she'd only kicked 5 years ago, sounded worried. "What's wrong? You never call this late." I took a deep breath and told her everything. The scandal at dinner, Lydia's words, Fergus's cold reaction, how I'd ended up in a hotel with one suitcase at 72. "That pompous turkey and your arrogant daughter put you out on the street?" Winifred was indignant after my story. "Beryl, darling, why didn't you call at once? I would have come for you." "It was late," I answered, and I needed time to think. "What's there to think about?" she snorted. "You're moving in with me tomorrow. I have 4 bedrooms and only 1 cat. There's plenty of room for everyone." I smiled sincerely for the first time that evening. Winifred had always been like that, opinionate, decisive, unthinking. That's why I'd loved her ever since I'd met her on the first day of college, almost 50 years ago. "Are you sure?" I asked. "This could be a long time coming." "I hope it's forever," she cut off. "I've been asking you to move in with me for 3 years now, instead of serving that ungrateful family. You finally made the right decision, albeit forced." We agreed that she would pick me up at the hotel at 10 in the morning. After the conversation, I felt the tension release a little. At least I had a plan for tomorrow and a roof over my head for the foreseeable future. I took a shower, trying to wash away not so much the physical fatigue, but the emotional sludge of the day. Lying in the unfamiliar bed, I couldn't sleep for a long time, replaying the events of the evening over and over in my head, imagining alternate scenarios where I said something different, where Lydia didn't explode, where Fergus stood up for me. But the reality was this. My own daughter had kicked me out of the house, and now I was to start a new life at 72. The morning greeted me with sunlight streaming through the loose curtains and the sound of cars pulling up to the hotel. I'd slept longer than usual, almost 9 o'clock, but I still felt wrecked. My headache had subsided, but it was replaced by a feeling of emptiness and unreality. I packed my things, went down to the lobby, and paid for my room. Then I went outside and sat on a bench in front of the hotel, enjoying the October sun. Owasso looked peaceful and sleepy, a small town where everyone knows everyone else, where news spreads at the speed of wildfire, where reputations are built over decades and destroyed in a single day. At exactly 10 o'clock, Winifred's silver Volvo pulled up to the hotel, the car she'd affectionately called my latest folly after she'd bought it for her 70th birthday, ignoring her son's exhortations that at her age it was time to stop driving. Winifred got out of the car, a tall, statuesque woman with short gray hair and bright lipstick on her lips. The years had hardly bent her back, though the wrinkles on her face had deepened and her gait was less springy. At 75, she still looked like a woman best not argued with. "Beryl!" She opened her arms and I stepped gratefully into them. "My dear, how angry I am with your daughter. Don't waste your energy on it," I smiled tiredly. "What's done is done." She snorted but didn't argue. Instead, she picked up my suitcase and headed toward the trunk. "I have the blue room ready for you," she said as we pulled into the driveway. "The one that faces the garden. Remember how you always said it was the most beautiful room in the house?" I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. Winifred wasn't just offering me a roof over my head, she was trying to make me happy in this new reality. "Thank you," I said softly, "for everything." She gave me a quick look of understanding and sympathy. "There's nothing to thank, sweetheart. Remember how you helped me after Gerald died? I thought I wasn't going to make it through the year. But you came every weekend, cooked dinner, made me leave the house. You kept me from drowning in grief. Now, it's my turn." Winifred's house stood on Maple Street, a quiet street in the older part of Owasso, where Victorian mansions neighbored more modern buildings. Her house was of the former category, a 3-story structure with a mansard, a wide porch, and a manicured garden. Gerald, her late husband, was a successful architect, and the house reflected his taste, elegant, spacious, but not ostentatious. Inside, we were greeted by Oscar, an old gray cat who perched on the windowsill in the hall like the master of the house. He stretched lazily as we entered, but did not come down to greet us. "Don't mind him," Winifred waved her hand. "He thinks of himself as emperor and us as his servants." She led me through the hall to the parlor, a spacious room with high ceilings and large windows. Antique furniture was juxtaposed with modern decor. Winifred always had a knack for combining tradition with novelty. "Make yourself comfortable," she said, pointing to the sofa. "I'll make tea and we can discuss plans." While she fiddled in the kitchen, I looked around, remembering how often I'd been here before. Before I moved in with Lydia, Winifred and I had met almost every week, drinking tea, discussing books, sharing news. After I moved in with my daughter, these meetings became less frequent. Fergus didn't particularly like Winifred, considering her eccentric and inappropriately straightforward for a woman of her age. Lydia didn't encourage our friendship either, especially after Winifred once bluntly told her that she was too strict with her mother. Winifred returned with a tray containing a teapot, cups, and a plate of cookies. "So," she said, pouring the tea, "what's your plan?" I sighed, taking the cup. "Honestly, I don't have one. Everything happened so suddenly. All I know is that I wouldn't go back to Lydia even if she asked me to, which I highly doubt." "And rightly so," Winifred nodded. "You've tolerated their neglect for too long. But that's not what I mean. What are you going to do with what you know about your brother-in-law's machinations?" I tensed up. Of course Winifred knew I had told her of my suspicions 2 years ago when I first discovered the discrepancies in Fergus's accounts. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Part of me wants to forget everything and start a new life." The other part of me realizes that to keep quiet is to be complicit. Winifred looked at me carefully over her glasses. What did you say to Fergus when you left? I was embarrassed, remembering what I'd said on the sidewalk. Ia hinted that I wouldn't keep their secrets anymore. Hinted? She raised an eyebrow. Or did she say it outright? More like the latter, I admitted. I was angry and disappointed. Then you have no choice. Winifred set the cup down firmly on the table. If you told Fergus that, he's not going to sit idly by. He'll try to discredit you before you can speak. Tell everyone you have dementia, that you're avenging your exile, that you've always hated him. You have to act first. I knew she was right. Fergus isn't the type to let threats go unheeded, especially one this serious. But what if I'm wrong? I asked, voicing the fear that had long kept me from acting. What if I misinterpreted what I saw? Beryl, Winifred covered my hand with hers. You're a former math teacher. You spent 30 years working with numbers. If you say there are discrepancies in the reports, then there are discrepancies. Plus, you've heard him talk. You've seen his correspondence. Trust your intuition. I nodded, feeling the determination growing inside me. For 5 years, I had turned a blind eye to what was going on in my daughter's house. 5 years I had been a silent witness to potentially dangerous lies. Not anymore. You're right, I said. We have to act, but how? Winifred smiled, and there was something predatory in her smile. I have a plan, and some useful contacts. We spent the next few hours discussing strategy. Winifred, a former lawyer, did have connections. She was friends with the editor of the local newspaper, the Owasso Chronicle, and was on good terms with the chairman of the town's medical board. Plus, her son, Marcus, worked at a law firm in a neighboring town and could provide professional advice. After lunch, Winifred showed me to my room, a spacious room with a large bed, a desk by the window, and a private bathroom. The windows overlooked the garden, where, even in October, the last of the roses were still blooming. Make yourself comfortable, she said, leaving me alone. Get some rest. Tonight we'll continue planning your revenge. It's not revenge, Winnie. I shook my head. It's justice. She winked at me and walked out, closing the door quietly. When I was alone, I unpacked my suitcase, hung my clothes in the closet, arranged the few personal items I had. Then I sat at the window, looking out over Winifred's garden and reflecting on the turn my life had taken. Just yesterday, I was just an elderly woman living in the shadow of my daughter and son-in-law's prosperity. Today, I stood on the threshold of a decision that could destroy their lives. It scared me, but at the same time, it gave me a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in years, I was not acting out of fear of losing the last crumbs of family warmth, but out of a sense of justice and dignity. The phone vibrated, a message from Cassandra. Grandma, are you okay? Mom says you're living in a hotel. Is that true? I'm worried. I smiled, touched by my granddaughter's concern, and replied, I'm fine, honey. I'm staying with Winifred, remember her? The lady with the cat and the raisin cookies. Don't worry about me. A minute later came the reply. Can I come over to your place? After school? Mom can't know. I hesitated. On the one hand, I desperately wanted to see my granddaughter. On the other, I didn't want to put her in the position of having to lie to her parents. Let me talk to your mom first, I wrote. I don't want you to get in trouble because of me. Mom won't let me, followed an instant reply. She said you said some nasty things about Dad and now we shouldn't hang out with you. I sighed. Of course, Lydia would try to turn the kids against me. It was predictable, but it still hurt. Let's meet at the Green Tea Cafe tomorrow after school, I wrote after thinking about it. 4 o'clock. Just please don't lie directly to your parents. Say you're going to a friend's house to do a project or something. Okay, Cassandra replied. Thank you, Grandma. I miss you. Those two simple words, I miss you, made my eyes fill with tears. Despite her outward aloofness and teenage rebellion, Cassandra was still the little girl who would climb into my lap and ask me to tell her a story. And now she missed me, just a day after I left. That evening, Winifred and I sat in her office, surrounded by papers. On the desk were copies of documents I'd made 2 years ago, the original clinical trial reports with side effect data, and the redacted versions Fergus had sent to the drug company. "That's enough to interest the medical board," Winifred said, studying the papers. "But for a serious investigation, you need more. Do you have access to more recent data?" I shook my head. "Only what I happen to see or hear." For the last 6 months, Fergus had been very careful, locking his office, never leaving documents in plain sight. "It's a shame," Winifred tapped her fingers on the table. "But that should be enough to get you started. Tomorrow I'll call Jeremy, the chairman of the medical board, and ask for a meeting. And then I'll contact Helena at the Chronicle. She loves breaking stories." "Are you sure it's a good idea to involve the press?" I asked hesitantly. "It could hurt the children," Winifred sighed. "Beryl, darling, you're too kind. But think about it. If your brother-in-law is really falsifying data about the side effects of a drug that's about to go on the market, we're talking about people's health and even lives. This isn't a domestic dispute, it's a crime." I knew she was right. Silence in this case made me an accomplice. But the thought of being the cause of a public scandal that would affect my grandchildren was almost physically painful. "Let's try the official route first," I suggested. "A medical board, perhaps a pharmaceutical company. If that doesn't work, then we'll go to the press." Winifred nodded, though it was clear she would have preferred a more aggressive approach. "All right, but don't forget, Fergus won't sit idly by. Once he realizes you're really going to expose the truth, he's going to start defending himself. And defenses can get very messy." I remembered Fergus's cold stare as he set my suitcase on the sidewalk. His words that I should think about Lydia and the kids, his almost threatening tone. "I understand the risk," I said quietly, but I couldn't stay silent any longer, not after they broke off our relationship on their own. Winifred smiled and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you, Beryl. I always knew that underneath that soft shell there was a core of steel." We spent another hour discussing the details of the plan. Then Winifred left to call her son, and I stayed in my office, going through documents and remembering everything I'd seen and heard over the past 3 years. The side effects Fergus was hiding were serious, ranging from liver problems to neurological symptoms. About 20% of patients taking ART-43 developed these complications, but reports sent to the drug company reduced that figure to 3%. "Statistical error," as Fergus once said in a phone conversation with a colleague. I remembered the first time I came across these documents, looking for Fergus's lost cufflink in his office. He accused me of improperly ironing his shirt, and the cufflink had fallen off. The box of papers fell off the shelf, and among the scattered sheets I saw 2 almost identical reports with different data. At first I thought it was a mistake, a typo. Then I heard Fergus's phone conversation in which he spoke openly about correcting the data. Then a conversation with Lydia, where she urged him to be careful with the documents. For 3 years I remained silent, convincing myself that I didn't know enough about medicine to draw conclusions, that maybe there was some logical explanation, that for the sake of the children it was best not to interfere. But now that Lydia herself had destroyed our family bond, I had no reason to remain silent. Fergus had to answer for his actions, and Lydia had to answer for her complicity. I gathered the documents into the folder Winifred had offered to keep in her safe. Then I went out to the veranda where my friend was smoking, a habit she returned to in times of stress, despite her promises to quit. "I'm sorry," she smiled guiltily, noticing my gaze. "Old habits die hard. So do old secrets," I replied, sitting down next to her. We were silent, staring out at the evening garden. The October air was cool, but not yet cold. Somewhere in the distance, a dog was barking. A peaceful picture, completely out of keeping with the storm that was about to break out in our little community. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Winifred suddenly asked. "It's not too late to forget everything, to start a new life here with me, without scandal and exposure." I wondered. Part of me really wanted that, a quiet, peaceful life with a trusted friend, away from family drama and ethical dilemmas. But the other part of me knew that I could never be at peace with myself if I kept quiet. "I have to do this," I said firmly. "Not for revenge, but because it's the right thing to do." Winifred nodded, put out her cigarette, and took my hand. "Then we'll do it together. Tomorrow, I'll call Jeremy and make an appointment. And then, whatever happens, happens. I sat in Winifred's kitchen, sipping my morning coffee and looking out the garden through the big window. Oscar, my friend's cat, was nestled in a nearby chair and lazily washing his face. A peaceful domestic scene, completely out of keeping with the hurricane I had launched yesterday afternoon. After much deliberation, I decided to act quickly and decisively. Winifred and I called her longtime friend Jeremy Hammond, chairman of the city's medical board, and arranged an emergency meeting. Hammond, a gray-haired man with a keen eye and a reputation for incorruptible medical ethics, scrutinized the documents I presented. "Mrs. Sangwain," he said then, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "If all this is true, it's a very serious matter. Tampering with the results of a clinical trial is a felony." "I understand," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's why I came to you. Do you realize that this will ruin your son-in-law's career and possibly affect your whole family?" I nodded, feeling the weight of the decision with my whole being. "But if we don't stop him now, people will suffer. The side effects he's hiding could have permanent health consequences." Hammond looked at me for a long moment, as if assessing my resolve, then nodded. "I will initiate an investigation immediately. Please be prepared to give formal testimony." After that, things spun with incredible speed. The medical board contacted the pharmaceutical company for which Fergus worked. At the same time, Winifred contacted the editor of the local newspaper, not for publication, but so that journalists would be ready when the scandal broke. And so today, just 24 hours after I left my daughter's house, all the local news channels were buzzing with the scoop. Renowned doctor falsified clinical trial results. Dr. Abbott under investigation. Clinic closed pending investigation. In the online version of the local paper, I saw my son-in-law's familiar face, a picture of him from last year's fundraiser, where he looked like a model citizen and respected medical professional. "I think it started," Winifred said, entering the kitchen with a clipboard in hand. "Fergus has just been taken from the clinic in handcuffs. Witnesses say he was screaming conspiracy and slander." I felt a strange emptiness inside, not gloating or satisfaction, but rather fatigue and a slight nausea. "You did the right thing, Beryl." Winifred put her hand on my shoulder. "He was endangering people's lives for money and prestige." I nodded, not trusting my voice. In my mind, I knew I'd done the right thing. Fergus had to answer for his actions, but emotionally, I couldn't help thinking about Lydia and my grandchildren, about how this would affect their lives. The phone rang, interrupting my musings. Lydia's number. I hesitated, staring at the screen. "You don't have to answer it," Winifred said. "No," I shook my head. "I have to listen to her." I pressed the answer button and heard my daughter's ragged breathing. "How could you?" Her voice sounded both angry and desperate. "How could you do this to us?" "Lydia," I tried to speak calmly, "your husband faked the test results. People could have gotten hurt." "You don't understand anything," she screamed. "You ruined our family, our reputation, our lives. And for what? To get back at us for asking you to move out?" "I'm not getting revenge," I said firmly. "If it was just a little thing, I would never—" "Little things?" Lydia interrupted. "You call this trivial? Fergus has been arrested, in front of our children. The police are searching our house. My children were being interrogated, Mom." I closed my eyes, imagining Garth and Cassandra's terrified faces. The thought hurt. "I'm sorry the children are involved," I said sincerely. "But you and Fergus should have realized the risk of what you were doing." "I didn't do anything!" Lydia screamed again. "I was just supporting my husband. That's normal." "You knew, Lydia," I objected softly. "I heard your conversations. You were helping him hide the truth." There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. "They're accusing me of complicity," Lydia finally said, her voice suddenly quiet and lost. "I've been fired. No severance pay. I could lose my right to work in the medical field. Do you realize what you've done?" "Lydia." I tried to find the right words. "I know this is hard for you, but think about the patients who could have been hurt. The consequences if the drug had gone on the market with fake safety reports." "Don't you dare lecture me!" My daughter's voice is back to a harsh tone. "You betrayed your family, your own daughter. That is unforgivable. And you kicked your mother out of the house." I said quietly. I think we're even. Lydia exhaled sharply as if I'd hit her. You know what? You're not my mother anymore, and you're not my children's grandmother. Forget about us. Forever. With those words, she hung up. I slowly set the phone down on the table, feeling strangely numb. Somewhere deep inside, I hoped Lydia would show some remorse, realize the seriousness of what she and Fergus had done. But all she saw was betrayal on my part, and she didn't realize her own guilt. She's in shock, Winifred said softly, setting a fresh cup of coffee in front of me. Give her time to realize what's happened. I shook my head. No, Winnie. She'll never forgive me. And I'm not sure I can forgive her. That's when Winifred's phone rang. She picked it up, listened to the person on the line, and turned to me. This is Elena from the Chronicle. She wants to interview you as a whistleblower. No, I shook my head firmly. No interviews. I did what I had to do, but I don't want publicity. Winifred handed over my refusal and hung up. I understand, she said, but know that you're a hero to a lot of people right now. Not everyone has the strength to do what you did. I grinned bitterly. A hero? I doubt Garth and Cassandra think so. As if in response to my words, the phone rang again. This time the number was unknown. I answered it cautiously. Grandma? Cassandra's voice sounded muffled, like she was whispering. Is that you? Yes, sweetheart. I felt my heart clench. Are you okay? I don't know, she answered honestly. Everything here is weird. Dad's been taken away by the police. Mom's crying and screaming. Garth has locked himself in his room and won't come out. I'm so sorry you're going through this, I said, barely holding back tears. It's not your and your brother's fault. Is that true? Cassandra asked suddenly. What they say about Dad? That he falsified some medical reports? I hesitated, not knowing how to answer a 16-year-old girl with a question like that. Yes, I finally said. I had proof, and I took it to the medical board. Is that why you left us? I could hear the confusion in her voice. Because of Daddy's job? No, honey. I left because your mom asked me to leave. Do you remember that night at dinner? I do, Cassandra answered quietly. She was yelling at you, but I thought you two would make up. Sometimes adults can't make up, I said softly. But that doesn't mean I stopped loving you and Garth. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Cassandra spoke even quieter. Mom says you betrayed our family, that you always hated Dad and wanted to hurt him. I sighed. Of course Lydia would try to turn the children against me. I never wanted to hurt your father, I said firmly. But what he was doing was wrong and dangerous. Sometimes you have to make hard choices to do the right thing. I have to go, Cassandra whispered suddenly. Mom's coming. I'll call later if I can. The connection ended, leaving me with a heavy heart and a lot of unspoken words. The day went on and the news got more dramatic. The Fergus Clinic was temporarily closed, with all patients being diverted to other medical facilities. The pharmaceutical company issued a press release denying any ties to the rogue researcher and promising full cooperation with the investigation. By late afternoon, local TV stations were blazing headlines about the medical scandal of the year. The news showed the Fergus Clinic with sealed doors, comments from shocked colleagues, and even a short interview with a patient who participated in the trials and now threatened a lawsuit. They're saying the first patients are already suing, Winifred said, switching channels. And this is just the beginning. I nodded silently, watching the reputation Fergus had spent years building crumble. His face on the screen looked gaunt and aged as the police led him out of the courthouse after his arraignment. Strange, I said, looking at the screen. I've known this man for 16 years, lived under the same roof with him for 5 years, and I still can't say I really knew him. People are good at hiding their true natures, Winifred said philosophically, especially from those around them. In the evening, Garth called. Unlike his sister, he didn't whisper and didn't hide. He spoke directly and sharply, with a hardness uncharacteristic of a 13-year-old boy. Why didn't you tell me the truth? He asked without greeting. When I wrote to you yesterday, you could have warned me. Warned of what, Garth? I asked cautiously. That you were going to turn Dad into the police. There was resentment in his voice. I looked like a complete idiot at school. Everyone already knew and I didn't. My heart ached. I hadn't thought about how the news would affect the kids at school, how quickly gossip would spread in a small town. I'm sorry, Garth, I said sincerely. I didn't want you to find out like this. The guys are saying that Dad's a criminal. His voice trembled. That he's going to jail. Is that true? I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to lie, but the truth seemed too cruel for a 13-year-old boy. Your dad made a mistake, I said carefully. A big mistake. And now he's going to have to take responsibility for his actions. But no matter what happens, he's still your father, and he loves you. If he loved me, Garth said bitterly, he wouldn't do things that could get him locked up. This phrase, spoken in a child's voice, struck me with its unchildlike wisdom. Garth understood more than I realized. Adults make mistakes too, honey, I said quietly. Sometimes very serious ones. How's Mom? He asked suddenly. Had she made a mistake too? I hesitated. I didn't want to turn my grandson against his mother, but I couldn't lie. Your mom knew what Dad was doing, I said finally, and she helped him hide it. But I'm sure she loves you and Cassandra more than anything. Then why does she scream all the time? Tears welled up in his voice. Why says such horrible things about you? Why did she make you leave? She's scared, Garth, I answered softly. When people are scared, they often say and do things they regret. Mom says you betrayed the family, he said after a pause. That you always hated Daddy and wanted to destroy us. The same words Cassandra had said. Lydia was clearly trying to indoctrinate the children into a certain version of events. That's not true, I said firmly. I never wanted to destroy your family. I loved you all, including your father. But sometimes you have to choose between family and what's right. And you chose the right thing? Garth asked with unchildlike seriousness. Yes, I answered quietly. I hope that someday you'll realize that. I sat still for a long time after I'd talked to Garth, staring out the window at the darkening sky. Winifred tactfully left me alone, realizing that I needed time to digest what had happened. Late that night, as we sat in the living room sipping herbal tea, Winifred's home phone rang. She answered, listened to the caller, threw me a worried look and said, Of course she is here. But Lydia, I don't think this is the right time. I put out my hand for the receiver. Winifred reluctantly handed it to me. Are you satisfied? Lydia's voice sounded hoarse, as if she had been screaming or crying for a long time. Did you get what you wanted? Lydia, I said tiredly. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, especially the children. It's too late to think about children, she shouted. You've already ruined everything. Fergus is under house arrest. He's out on bail, but he's not allowed to leave town. The clinic is closed. I've been fired. Our accounts are frozen. How are we going to live? Have you thought about that? You have an education, I reminded you. You can get another job, and you have a house. A house? Lydia laughed bitterly. What house are you talking about? Do you have any idea what's going on in the city? Everyone is talking about us. Neighbors have stopped saying hello. Friends won't return our calls. Peggy Thornton, my best friend from college, just canceled our meeting. Said she was uncomfortable socializing in the current situation. 15 years of friendship, and just like that, I sighed. Social isolation is another consequence I hadn't thought of. I'm sorry for what happened, I said sincerely. You and Fergus made a choice when you decided to fake the test results. I didn't fake anything, Lydia screamed. I was just helping my husband. Complicity is also a crime, I reminded her gently. And you, my own mother, will testify against me? There was disbelief in her voice. I hesitated. It was one thing to hand over documents about Fergus's machinations, and quite another to testify against my daughter in person. I'll only tell the truth, I finally said, about what I saw and heard. Then yes, Lydia said bitterly. You did betray your family. No, I said firmly. You betrayed medical ethics by helping Fergus cover up the dangerous side effects of the drug. You're the one who put patients at risk for financial gain. There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. You know what? Lydia finally said in a quiet, almost calm voice. I always thought you were weak, quiet, submissive, always giving in. But it turns out you're the most cruel and calculating person I know. Congratulations, Mom. You've won. Our lives are ruined. With those words, she hung up the phone. I slowly put the phone down, feeling a strange emptiness inside. She's in shock, Winifred said softly, taking the phone from me. Give her time to process what happened. I shook my head. No, Winnie, she'll never forgive me. And I'm not sure I can forgive her. I couldn't sleep that night for a long time, thinking about the consequences of my decision. I had done what I thought was right, but the price was high. I may have lost my daughter forever and risked my relationship with my grandchildren. Fergus and Lydia's family was destroyed, financially, socially, emotionally. Their reputation in the town they once considered their fortress was reduced to rubble. And yet, as I fell asleep in the morning, I felt no regret. Only the quiet certainty that I had done the right thing, even if I had to carry the burden of that decision for the rest of my life. 3 months flew by. January blanketed Owasso in a white blanket of snow, turning the small town into a Christmas card. Sitting by the window in Winifred's living room, I watched the snowflakes swirl in the light of the street lamps and thought about how my life had changed during that time. The scandal surrounding Fergus had gradually subsided. The first stormy weeks, when his name had been on the front page of the local newspapers, had been replaced by a calmer but no less thorough investigation. The pharmaceutical company canceled all contracts with him and initiated its own review. His medical license remained suspended, his clinic closed. Most of the patients involved in the trials filed a class action lawsuit. Lydia lost her job as clinic administrator and, as far as I knew from Garth, was trying to find a new one. But the reputation of being the wife of a fraudulent doctor closed many doors in front of her. The family's financial situation was becoming increasingly precarious. They had already sold one of their cars and fired the housekeeper. I watched all of this with mixed feelings. On the one hand, I didn't feel any gloating or satisfaction at their woes. On the other, I realized that the consequences were inevitable and deserved. Fergus and Lydia had made a choice when they decided to fake research results, and now they were paying for it. What's on your mind? Winifred entered the living room with 2 cups of hot chocolate. Family matters again? I gratefully accepted the cup and nodded. Today is Garth's 14th birthday. I sent a gift by courier, but I'm not sure Lydia will let him accept it. Winifred snorted, settling into the chair opposite. If she's going to throw away a gift for her own son just because of her pride, she's even stupider than I thought. She's just hurt, I countered softly, and scared. Her whole world is falling apart. A world built on lies will sooner or later collapse, Winifred said philosophically. By the way, did you remember that tomorrow we're meeting with Marcus to sign the education fund documents? I nodded. After much deliberation, I decided to set up an education fund for Garth and Cassandra. Regardless of their parents' actions, the children were not to suffer. Marcus, Winifred's son, and a successful lawyer, had helped arrange it so that neither Fergus nor Lydia could access the money. It was to be used solely for the grandchildren's college and other educational needs. Do you think Lydia will see this as another attempt at interference? I asked hesitantly. Perhaps. Winifred shrugged. But that shouldn't stop you. You're not doing this for her, you're doing it for the children. My life had changed dramatically in the last 3 months. No longer was I an elderly woman living in the shadow of my daughter and son-in-law's welfare, enduring petty humiliations for the chance to see my grandchildren. I now shared a spacious house with my best friend, had an active social life, and managed my time as I saw fit. Winifred and I attended art shows and concerts, went to the local theater, and participated in a book club. At Christmas, we went to a neighboring town for 2 days, staying in a cozy hotel overlooking the lake. In February, we planned a little trip to Florida to escape the cold winter. Financially, I was also independent. The money from the sale of the house, some of which I had once put into Fergus's investments, had been returned to me as part of the investigation. As it turned out, my son-in-law had misused it, adding another item to his list of transgressions. Now these funds, along with my retirement savings, allowed me to live a decent life and not worry about the future. But despite all the positive changes, there was still a wound in my heart, the separation from my daughter and limited communication with my grandchildren. Lydia flatly refused to speak to me. Her last message, sent 2 weeks after Fergus's arrest, was, I hope you are satisfied with the results of your betrayal. Don't try to contact us. With the grandchildren, the situation was more complicated. Cassandra, always more cautious and prone to compromise, communicated with me rarely and surreptitiously. Short messages, stolen calls. She was torn between loyalty to her parents and affection for me. Garth, on the other hand, displayed a surprising independence of judgment for his age. He wrote to me regularly, sometimes called, and a few times even came to visit, telling my parents he was going to a friend's house. On his last visit a week ago, we had a long talk about what had happened. I understand why you did it, Grandma, he said, sitting at the kitchen table and warming his hands over a cup of cocoa. Daddy wasn't doing the right thing, and you couldn't keep quiet. Thank you, Garth, I said quietly, touched by his understanding. Not many adults can see things so clearly. But Mom's still very angry, he continued, frowning. She says you destroyed our family out of revenge. I sighed. Lydia continued to see only personal motives in my actions, refusing to acknowledge the seriousness of what she and Fergus were doing. Your mom is scared and confused, I explained. When people are afraid, they often look around for someone to blame instead of looking at themselves. How's Daddy doing? I asked after a pause, trying to keep my voice neutral. Garth shrugged. I don't know. He doesn't talk much. Sits in his office all day long. Sometimes I hear him and Mom fighting at night. My heart is tight. Despite everything that had happened, I didn't want a family nightmare for my grandchildren. What about you? I asked gently. How was school? Fine. He tried to smile, but it was a strained smile. It was hard at first. Everyone was talking about Dad, pointing fingers. But it's better now. I have friends who don't mind it. That's when Garth told her that Cassandra was having a harder time with the situation. Social approval means a lot more at 16 than it does at 13. Some of her friends stopped socializing with her. Her boyfriend broke off the relationship. She began to do worse in school, cried often and hardly ever left her room. I took all this news with mixed feelings. I didn't want the children to suffer, but I realized that my actions were necessary. Fergus couldn't continue to endanger the patients, and I couldn't remain a silent accomplice. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my musings. Winifred, who was reading a book in the chair across the hall, raised her eyebrows in surprise. Are you expecting someone? I shook my head and went to open the door. To my amazement, Lydia stood on the threshold, pale, gaunt, with dark circles under her eyes. May I come in? She asked, not looking me in the eye. We need to talk. I stepped back silently, letting her into the house. Lydia came in, looking around warily, as if she expected a trick. When she saw Winifred, she tensed even more. Perhaps we had better talk in private, I asked, turning to my daughter. Lydia nodded. Winifred rose understandingly and, with a reassuring glance at me, left the room. Have a seat, I pointed to the couch. Would you like some tea? No, Lydia answered sharply, but sat down. I didn't come to drink tea. I sank into the chair opposite, preparing for an unpleasant conversation. Lydia looked exhausted, but there was determination in her eyes. Fergus is pleading guilty, she said suddenly. In a plea bargain, he faces probation and a hefty fine, but no jail time. I'm glad the children won't lose their father, I replied sincerely. Lydia gave me a quick glance, as if checking to see if I was mocking her. Of course, his medical career is over, she continued bitterly. And so is mine. No one wants to hire a cheating doctor's wife, even in an administrative position. I remained silent, not knowing what to say. Any expression of sympathy might have sounded fake, given my role in their current situation. You must be happy, Lydia said defiantly. You got what you wanted, ruined our lives. I never wanted to ruin your life, I replied quietly. I wanted to stop a dangerous practice that could hurt people. And for that, you betrayed your own family? There was an old resentment in her voice. No, Lydia, I said firmly. I didn't betray my family. I did what any responsible citizen should do. What you and Fergus did wasn't just unethical, it was a crime. Lydia looked away, her shoulders slumping slightly. I didn't know everything, she said quietly. Fergus didn't fill me in on the details. I was just helping with the paperwork. You knew enough, I said softly but insistently. I'd heard your conversations. I saw you helping to edit the reports. I trusted my husband, she exclaimed with sudden fury. Is that a crime? He said everything was under control, that it was standard practice in research, that the side effects were negligible. And you believed that? I asked, looking her straight in the eye. Even when you saw the actual numbers? Even when you heard about patients with serious complications? Lydia didn't answer, averting her gaze. In her silence, I saw the answer clearer than any words. Why did you come, Lydia? I asked after a pause. She took a deep breath, as if gathering her strength. Garth wants to live with you, she said at last. He said so yesterday. He said that if we didn't let him see you, he'd still sneak over. I was stunned. Yes, Garth had shown affection for me, but I'd never imagined he'd take such a step. He's just a kid, I said carefully. Maybe it's just an emotional reaction to stress. No, Lydia shook her head. He's serious. He's gathered information about the rights of minors, about how the foster care system works. He'd even found some legal precedents for children his age being able to choose who they wanted to live with. I was impressed with my grandson's determination and entrepreneurship. What do you want me to do? I asked. I want you to talk him out of it, Lydia answered, looking me straight in the eye for the first time in the whole conversation. Tell him you can't accept him, that you don't have the conditions, anything. But that's not true, I countered. I do have conditions and a desire to see grandchildren. I've always said so. So you want to take my son away from me too? There was desperation in her voice. Not only have you ruined our reputation, our career, our financial situation, now you want to take our children? I don't want to take anyone away, Lydia, I said firmly. But I won't lie to Garth. If he wants to see me, I'm happy to. If he wants to stay with me for a while, I won't say no. But the decision must be his, not mine or yours. Lydia covered her face with her hands. For a moment I thought she was going to cry. But when she lowered her hands, her eyes were dry. I've lost everything, she said quietly. My job, my reputation, my respect. Fergus. He's no longer the man I married. He's broken. Angry. Cassandra's withdrawn. Barely speaks. And now Garth wants to leave. For the first time in the whole conversation, I felt a prick of sympathy. Despite everything that had happened between us, Lydia was still my daughter, and it hurt to see her suffering. Maybe we should consider a compromise. I suggested it. Garth could spend weekends or a few days a week at my place. That would give him the space he needs, but he would remain part of your family. Lydia looked up at me tiredly. Do you really think that would work? I don't know, I answered honestly. But it's worth a try, for Garth's sake. She nodded slowly, as if every movement required effort. Good! Have him come for the weekend. We'll see how it works. I felt relieved, not a complete victory, but a step in the right direction. And Cassandra? I asked cautiously. She could come too if she wanted to. Cassandra's going through a difficult time, Lydia answered evasively. Give her time. I nodded, realizing I shouldn't push. The important thing was that the door to communicating with my grandchildren was now ajar. There's something else, Lydia said, rising. I heard that you are creating an educational foundation for children. Yes, I confirmed. Regardless of our relationship, I want to ensure their future. Thank you, she said quietly, the word clearly difficult to say. Given our current financial situation, this will help. I nodded, not wanting to emphasize her gratitude, which was clearly worth the effort. I'll go, Lydia said, heading for the door. Can Garth come this Friday? Of course, I replied. I'll be waiting for him. When the door closed behind her, I stood in the hallway for a long time, digesting what happened. Winifred came over quietly and put her hand on my shoulder. How did it go? Better than I expected, I answered honestly. Garth will be coming in on weekends. Maybe eventually Cassandra will too. That's good, she nodded. Children shouldn't have to suffer because of their parents' mistakes. Yes, I agreed, but then added with a sad smile, though Lydia still thinks it's my fault, not her and Fergus's actions. She needs time, Winifred said philosophically. She might never fully admit her guilt, but in time her anger would subside. I nodded. realizing the wisdom of those words. A full reconciliation with her daughter would likely never happen. Too much had been said and done on both sides. But perhaps in time we could find a way to coexist, if only for the sake of the children. In the evening, sitting in my room looking out over the snow-covered garden, I reflected on the turn my life had taken. 3 months ago, I was an unwelcome guest in my daughter's house, enduring petty humiliations for the chance to see my grandchildren. Today, I am an independent woman, living life to the fullest, free from toxic relationships and silent complicity in other people's crimes. The price of this freedom was high: the separation from my daughter, the suffering of my grandchildren, the destruction of the family I loved despite everything. But I could not do otherwise. Sometimes you have to make hard choices to live in harmony with your own conscience. I pulled from my desk drawer the small box I'd prepared for Garth for his arrival on Friday, a pocket watch that had once belonged to his grandfather. A symbol of time, always moving forward, never stopping or turning back, and neither does life. My new life was just beginning. At 72, I was opening a new chapter, with friends who had become family, with grandchildren whose relationships would be built on honesty and mutual respect, with plans and dreams that once seemed out of reach. I didn't know what the future would bring. Perhaps in time Lydia would soften and find the strength to face the truth. Perhaps Cassandra would overcome her reticence and once again become the open, inquisitive girl I knew. Maybe Garth would find a balance between living with his parents and spending time with me. But even if none of that happened, I knew I had done the right thing. In a world where it's so easy to turn a blind eye to untruth, to choose comfort over truth, I found the strength to stand on the side of justice, even when it cost me the bonds of family. And in that decision, in that ability to stay true to myself even in the face of loss, I found the satisfaction and dignity that years of acquiescence and self-deception could not give me.